the Greys are not aliens. They're mutated humans from a parallel version of Earth that destroyed their version of Earth to the point where they had to go underground. They mutated. Their eyes got bigger to see in the dark and all this kind of stuff, but they had to mutate to survive. They tried cloning themselves to save their civilization, and that didn't work. Over generations, things started failing. They knew that they were basically in the process of dying out. So what they knew they needed to basically perpetuate their civilization was viable human DNA, which didn't exist anymore in their reality. But they used their advanced technology to tunnel into parallel realities, to shift into parallel worlds like ours, parallel versions of Earth that exist simultaneously with theirs, where viable human DNA was still existing. And to use that DNA through the abduction experiences to create hybrid beings from their DNA and our DNA so that their civilization would continue, would survive. So the hybrid civilizations, like Bashar's people, are actually the result of those abduction experiences and the perpetuation of their culture. But sort of as a payback for the use of that DNA, the hybrids, now like Bashar, are sharing information with us in our reality so that we might not necessarily have to go down the same destructive path that the Greys went down as humans on their version of Earth, because they recognize that we're doing many of the same things that led to the destruction of that parallel version
Indeed.
of Earth.
Right now on Higher Journeys with Alexis Brooks. Darryl Anka, what can I say? Welcome back again and again and again and again. I think it's been 5 times. This will make the 5th time you have graced us with your presence.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me and providing an opportunity to share information.
To continue to share information. I always ask myself and ask you, do you ever get tired of doing this? Do you ever feel like,
No,
no?
this information is my passion, at least one expression of it. And so, no.
Well, I think that would be a great springboard. By the way, Journeyers, we are going to be talking about one of Darryl. This is a Darryl production, First Contact, channeling Bashar, a film, a brilliant film, by the way, done back in 2016, Darryl. We're going to get into that. But I think what's warranted is to bounce all around, because Bashar has so many messages, evergreen messages, new things coming out, and you just prompted one, and it has to do with passion. If there was one mantra that Bashar has been consistent with since the beginning, it has to do with following our passion.
Yes.
That could seem a little, to some, a little airy-fairy. Well, what do you mean passion? And what if I can't find my passion? And what if I'm in crisis
Right.
and it's more difficult for me to beeline toward that passion? What does Bashar have to say about people maybe struggling to find their passion?
Well, that's what I like about Bashar's messages, is that they're very, no pun intended, down to earth, in the sense that he understands that we're physical and we need a practical application of these concepts that have sort of, as you say, sort of been left nebulous in the New Age movement and haven't been really well explained as to why that's important. Why does it work in your life to follow your passion? And so he comes across with a very pragmatic toolkit and explaining why that's important, how it works, what it taps into. The main thing to, I guess, understand first and foremost about it is we all, as physical beings, still have a non-physical higher mind. And that's the part of us in spirit that remains there. And so the idea is that our higher mind is constantly guiding us, communicating with us. But because it's non-physical, it communicates in energy. Its messages come in a form of energy. But our physical bodies translate that energy, those messages, as the sensation we call passion, excitement, creativity, love. So when we're willing to act on things and situations, opportunities that contain more excitement than any other, we are actually following the guidance of our higher mind that's saying, this is you. This is the next step on your path. That's why it's coming to you this way. This is the move to take. This is the action to take right now. And when we do that, When we're willing to follow that guidance, then we're creating a dialogue with the higher mind, and we're responding to it. We're saying, yes, I hear you. I hear you saying this is my next step because it comes with this kind of vibration. And if we're willing to act on it, then we set up a dialogue with the higher mind. So the higher mind can say, okay, you heard me. I'm going to send you more opportunities to act on your passion, because there's no point in it sending us more opportunities to act on our passion, to follow our path, if we're not even willing to act on what it's already sent us. So it'll wait until we have taken some action in that direction, then it will keep that going through synchronicity. Now, again, the idea is that this is really what we're all about. And the idea of having difficulty figuring out what our passion is just because most people think that when we say act on your passion, that means you have to be jumping up and down and running around with your hair on fire. It's really very basic. It's the idea of, at any given moment, on every given day, you have a number of options available to you to take action on. And they can be very everyday, simple things. You can take a walk. You can have lunch. You can talk to a friend. You can watch a movie. The thing is to look at all the options available to you and just pick the one that has slightly, even slightly more attractiveness or excitement or curiosity attached to it, and act on that first. That's always the step to take. Do what you can to act on that first. Now, that doesn't always mean that that thing has to come to fruition. It just means you need to take some action to get the ball rolling. And then it will kind of snowball and bring you more and more opportunities to act on your passion in perhaps more expanded and bigger ways. But the idea is that it's not that difficult to act on your passion if you simply reduce it to the simple things in life, at least at first, and act on them to the best you can. Now, if more than one thing seems to be equally exciting, that you have equal ability to act on, then it doesn't really matter which one you do first. You might as well flip a coin. And sometimes flipping a coin between two things will tell you what you're really more excited about. Because you could say, all right, well, heads, I'll do A, and tails, I'll do B. And you flip the coin and it's tails, and you go, oh, darn, I wish it was A. Oh, I wish it was A. So that tells you that's more exciting for you. That's more attractive to you, and you can go in that path. But again, it doesn't really matter, because of the principle of synchronicity as the organizing principle in your life and the guiding principle, and everything being connected in that way. If you act on something that isn't necessarily out of those two things or three things, how many ever excite you, if you act on one that isn't necessarily the best path for you to take right now, synchronicity will create circumstances to turn you around to the path that is, because it will block you from being able to take action on the things that aren't necessarily the correct things to take action on at this moment. Because there are two types of positive synchronicity, what we sort of refer to euphemistically as green light synchronicity and red light synchronicity. So while there is true negative synchronicity that helps you spiral downward if you're constantly basing your actions on fear and negative belief systems, there are also a positive and a negative positive synchronicity, so to speak. So we call it green light, red light. And that is, the green light synchronicity are the opportunities you are able to act on. And red light synchronicity is still representative of your passion, but it's telling you this may not be the step to take right now.
Right now.
And so it stops you from being able to act on it. So instead of beating your head against the wall and saying, why can't I do this? Why can't I do this? Why can't I do this? It's about synchronicity saying you need to do something else first to get the information and experience you need so you can come back around and do this later. Because again, it's the organizing principle. It literally organizes the time frame and the order in which you need to act on your passion. So if you can't act on something you're excited about, find out what you can take action on something that you're excited about. Even if it's not quite the same thing or seems to be disconnected, it's the excitement that tells you it is connected. And if you act on the one you can act on, it will probably give you the experience and the information, the knowledge, the education you need to be able to act on other things that excite you in a more experienced way. So it all works together as a kind of an automatic toolkit if you just understand the principles that he's talking about and follow them precisely. It's literally like an instruction manual.
I was just going to say, this is a manual, and it can be a little daunting for some, but I heard a few things, excuse me, Darryl. first and foremost, going back to passion as being the conduit to getting to the higher self. I think that's very interesting. It's almost as if when you're acting on your passion, whether I would call it the way you're describing it, there are micro passions, going for a walk, gardening, and then macro, which would be the larger sort of framework of a career endeavor,
Yeah,
becoming a healer, something that's very large, and yet they're all connected. But
right.
all of these, if you're following the manual properly, can get you more connected into the consciousness of the higher self.
Right.
Is that the only way we can connect into what we call our higher consciousness?
Well, there are all sorts of permission slips, as Bashar calls it. In other words, anything you're attracted to use as a methodology, be it meditation or reading tarot cards or astrology, all these things to him are what he calls permission slips. And it's still, again, following your passion, because if you're excited to do that, excited to explore any one of those particular disciplines or techniques, or rituals, that's still part of following your passion. And the idea is that he calls them permission slips because he's saying, look, your belief system says you're attracted to use this because you believe it will help you tap into what you need to tap into, and you're still doing it. But because you have a certain belief system within you, you can use this tool to seemingly make it easier to do so. And that's fine. That's absolutely fine. So there are many methodologies. It's just that they're still all representative of your passion if you're attracted to use it.
I was smiling when you were talking about maybe it's tarot cards. Do you know, guys, I just did a little segment, Darryl, on my getting a psychic reading and then using oracle cards afterward to sort of test the accuracy of what was told to me. And so I was saying to the audience, I don't know if you know this, but I love to shuffle. I would have to say, that's one of my passions. I don't necessarily
Mhm.
need to do it as a career, but I
Right.
get such an enjoyment out of that in the
Right.
moment. And I get
Yeah.
urges where I want to do it.
All those methodologies are fine as long as it is representative of something you're really attracted to do. In fact, he's saying the reason you're attracted to it is because it's representative of your vibration. It's what will work for you. If you're not attracted to it, it won't work for you.
Absolutely.
But
That makes
any
perfect sense.
discipline, any tool, any ritual, any object that you're attracted to use as a help, as a permission slip, is absolutely fine. So there are as many methodologies perhaps as there are people.
Yeah, or even just for fun. I was just saying, and I'm very judicious about shuffling for myself because
Mhm.
we can get caught up and get in our own way. Actually prefer to
Sure,
shuffle for other people. So it's
sure.
just the love of the cards and being able to shuffle
Well,
that I
that
enjoy.
sounds like passion to me.
Oh yeah, yeah. We'll see where we go with it. Okay. Well, listen. Speaking of passion, let's segue because I want to get into this. You will be passionate about First Contact, guys. Trust me if you haven't seen it. By the way, this is on Gaia, and we will have a link so you can go watch it for
Mhm.
free. How about that?
Yeah.
Watch it because you got a lot of messages there. People are becoming increasingly passionate about this whole idea of contact, Darryl. There's a lot going on right now
Yes,
and
there
it's
is.
being represented somehow in the mainstream. There's a lot of buzz about what the motivation might be, but regardless of what it is, it's happening. What
Yeah,
is
I
Bashar saying about all of what's happening right now?
yeah, he's saying it's the very beginning stages of disclosure, the very beginning stages of it being okay to recognize that there are definitely different levels to this reality. There are things going on that we have denied for a long time, but it's part of reality. And that now it's becoming a little bit more okay to acknowledge it, to talk about it, to say, yes, these things exist. I know it's not full disclosure yet, but it's the very beginning stages of it, and we can build on that, and that's okay. So, whatever timing it requires, whatever pacing people need to get used to this idea is fine. But we are beginning to finally acknowledge that there are things that we don't understand that are part of our reality, a greater reality. And now it's okay to discuss that and talk about it and share ideas about what we're experiencing and share our experiences about all that.
Well, that's the big thing. And, when I say the mainstream, obviously there's been a whole narrative in the news, not the least of which is David Grush coming forward back in June as the whistleblower. First one to, whether it's accurate or not, it doesn't really matter to me. But the inference of non-human intelligence for the
Right.
very first time being introduced into a mainstream dialogue to me was a big glass ceiling breaker.
Yeah.
Uh, this is unprecedented.
Yeah, and I think the more that it's discussed, the more willing certain people will be to come forward with the knowledge that they have kept secret for so long. It's becoming safer for people to talk about what's been going on. There's so much information behind the scenes. There's so much information. It's kind of like I sort of jokingly call this the biggest secret that everyone knows. It's like everyone kind of knows this and everyone has all these experiences. They just don't talk about them because they're afraid to, because they're afraid they're going to be ridiculed or thought that they were crazy or something like that. But now it's becoming safer for people to talk about this kind of information that they may have known about for a long time, or their experiences with contact, encounters they've had, sightings they've had, so on and so forth, because there is definitely a reality here that we need to incorporate into our bigger picture of what life is all about.
No question. And I'd say end fast. I think there
Well,
may
again,
be, yeah,
it has its own timing, and that's okay. Yeah.
it has its own timing. Well,
Yeah.
that brings about a whole other conversation on the nature of time and
Mm.
multiple Earths versions, and some may
Right.
be, well,
Parallel realities.
parallel realities. We'll get into that a little bit more. I want to quote
Okay.
something from your film where you say, you ask the question, is it possible that Earth is being contacted telepathically by extraterrestrial beings through channeling?
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about telepathy and channeling and the bridge between those and the ET reality.
Sure. I mean, the thing I like about Bashar's explanation is that he really says telepathy is telempathy. In other words, you're not actually reading another person's mind. You are getting on the same wavelength as them and having the same thoughts at the same time, because those are the thoughts that are commensurate with that frequency of energy. So you're really reading your own mind. It's just that you know what someone else is thinking because you're on the same wavelength. And this is why, as Bashar explains it, people who are deeply in love will often know exactly what each other is thinking and finish each other's sentences and have very little verbal communication. They'll know exactly what each other is saying. So the more you are in sync, in love, on the same frequency as someone else, the more telepathic you become, the more you understand what they're thinking because you're thinking the same thing simultaneously. That's what telepathy is.
Telepathic.
Telepathy. Telepathic.
Telepathy.
Right.
So that makes sense. But then the question becomes, let's go to the individuals that are having experiences, having contact encounters. And invariably, Darryl, they will say that the communication that happened was telepathic. So
Mm-hmm.
are you saying that in the case of between non-human intelligence and us humans, contactees, that we are on the same wavelength as the entity that we're in contact
To a
with?
degree, yes. In other words, exposure to the vibration of certain ET beings, when we're open to it, when we're willing to do that, whether consciously or unconsciously, shifts our vibration to be more in sync with them. In other words, the only reason the contact happens is because we're at least somewhat in sync with their vibration, or the vibration itself of contact, of exchange. And it's the willingness, conscious or unconscious willingness, to be okay with that contact happening that actually allows the telepathic bond to exist. So I'm sure there's a frequency range within that. More precise frequencies may cause more precise telepathic communication. But the idea that the contact happens at all kind of hints at the idea that the person having the contact, the human having the contact, is at least somewhat open, again, consciously or unconsciously, to the vibration of the ET they're in contact with. And that can promote the idea of telepathic or telepathic communication.
Keyword or unconscious. The
Mm-hmm.
lecture that I've given and I will be giving along with you in Las Vegas coming up has
Yeah.
to do with unconscious contact. Are you an experiencer and don't know it? Darryl,
Right.
how many people might be walking the face of this planet that are completely oblivious to perhaps lifelong encounters Does Bashar ever speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, again, people will often come to him and talk about, oh, I've had this dream or I've had this weird experience and stuff like that. And he'll recognize that, it's not always the case, but he'll recognize many of the indicators, the symptoms, so to speak, of contact, and be able to suss out whether or not what they're experiencing is something psychological or whether they're actually having bleed through memories
Mm.
of actually having contact. So a lot of the conversations people have with him are, you know, have I actually had encounters? And in those discussions, he'll be able to ferret out what the symptoms are and let them know whether or not these dreams or memories or whatever they are representative of contact or representative of something else.
Hmm. Let's go to your experience all the way back in 1973. You've told this story many, many times before. You've told it to me before, but it never gets old, Darryl. When you were in that car with some family members, was it your sister and brother and maybe a couple of other friends?
Yes, it was my sister, my brother the first time, a very close friend, and her brother in the car with me when we had the first sighting in broad daylight, very close, about 150 feet away, of the triangular UFO, black with a blue white light on each point and a dull red orange light underneath in the center. We all witnessed it while we were driving and were quite astonished at seeing something like this. Very close up, very silent, moving very strangely, very smoothly through the air, hovering for quite a while. We were able to observe it probably for at least a good 30 to 45 seconds before it slid away over the valley. And then a week later, the second encounter with me and one of the friends that was with me the first time, where we're literally sitting at an intersection at a red light in West Los Angeles, and this UFO comes gliding over the street. Now it's only like maybe 70 feet up. I mean, it's really close. And again, broad daylight in the afternoon. And so, driving after it, trying to follow it, zigzagging through the neighborhood and winding up uh, as it stopped straight underneath it and watching it rise into the clouds in the blink of an eye. These two encounters a week apart started my journey of investigating what's this all about, because we'd
Mhm.
always heard, well, UFOs, stuff like that, but until you actually see something like that in broad daylight with witnesses and it's a solid object being obviously directed by some intelligence, it changes your world. It turns everything upside down. You now know that these things are real, are part of your reality, and you just want to really find out more about it. And that's what started me investigating and reading every book I could find on different encounters, and eventually coming across other metaphysical material like the Seth
Mhm.
books and
Mhm.
so on and so forth. So yeah, I mean, that really got me going. That was what really started my journey of remembering that I made an agreement to do this in this life with Bashar, to assist in the evolution of humanity and the evolution of contact between Earth humans and other species.
Mhm. Sounds like you ignited a passion on the spot, and therefore that had, I'm sure, had a lot to do with your connecting with the higher self, bringing in Bashar. It's all connected.
Oh, absolutely.
Here's a question I have. There's two, and I know I've asked one before, so
Hmm.
apologies if you
Ah,
recall that I asked. But have you ever thought about the idea, Darryl, that one or maybe both of those sightings were more than just sightings, that it could have been a contact encounter implicit in the sighting?
Oh no, absolutely. I mean, that's what came back to me when I went into this channeling class, which was a series of meditations 10 years after the sighting. I didn't think I was going to become a channel, but I was just wanting to see how channeling could be taught to people. And it was during the meditations in those classes that I received the telepathic or telepathic contact with Bashar. And I understood immediately in that split second that I had made an agreement to do this with him in this life. And I understood that the UFOs were his ship and that he was showing that to me to get me to start learning about these kinds of things. So, no, that was an absolutely deliberate ignition of starting me off to learn what I needed to learn so that by the time it came time to start the channeling, I would be better prepared. So no, that was an absolutely deliberate act on his part.
Okay. But you had other people in the car that witnessed it with you, and
Well,
yet
sure.
they're not channeling Bashar, or are
No,
they?
no, because it was primarily for me in that context. But again, it gave me the validation that I wasn't just making this up or hallucinating it, because everyone in the car saw this and could back me up and describe it exactly as I saw it. So that just gave me the solidity of the assurance that I had a real experience that other people could witness simultaneously, that it was a real thing in our reality.
Do you recall other? This is the question I think I've asked before, but you were in Los Angeles. There's other people there. Anybody else see this craft?
Many, many years later, I came across a UFO witness account that described the same event.
Ah,
But when we were having the experience, I was looking around at the other cars and I didn't see anyone else looking up at it. So I'm really not sure how many other people may or may not have witnessed it. I do know that sometimes, because of the frequency of the experience, that sometimes certain people who are within a certain vibrational frequency can see them, and people right next to them cannot. So it may have been a very selective frequency for
mhm.
me and those in my immediate proximity. But I do know many years later that someone else did see it, because they mentioned it in the same kind of description in the same year. So other people obviously did witness it, but I didn't know that, like I said, till many years later.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Because of the way you describe it, it was it's so close, in such close proximity to your vehicle and other vehicles around it. It's just
Yeah, well, and even more mysteriously in the second encounter, which was very much closer, and we were zigzagging around this neighborhood trying to follow it because it was a little hard to see because of all the trees.
Mhm.
And when we finally stopped and it was right above us, and it shot up into the clouds in the blink of an eye. And we both got out of the car and we're looking around, and there was no one on the street. No one walking their dog, no one watering their lawn. It was like it was just in some sort of isolated reality where nobody else was around for blocks. And so that was almost even weirder than seeing the UFO,
Absolutely.
because there was no one around us that we could see. And so it was almost like deliberately isolated so we would have the experience and no one else would.
I've heard these sorts of things before, Darryl. You
Yeah.
probably have as well, that whomever and whatever we're dealing with may have the ability to literally bifurcate us from. Bashar talks about this one version of Earth and put you in another version of Earth where there is nobody else but you and the craft.
Yeah. And I'm not even sure it had to happen that way. They may have just been able to tell there was just nobody around at that. And that's why they stopped at that point. And we were underneath them, is they chose that spot as being an isolated spot where no one else would experience it but us. So
Mhm.
however that works, that's the way it worked out.
Mhm. Have you had dreams or any other, um, well, dreams, I guess you could say,
I've
about that experience
I've had
years
dream
later?
encounters with him about 4 or 5 times that I know are not normal dreams, because that's all that's happening is I'm having a conversation or witnessing him in the dream doing something. And it's just a straightforward interaction. It's not any crazy dream. There's nothing peripheral to it, nothing else going on. So, and they have a different quality to them that I know is an actual communication of sorts. So I've had about 4 or 5 dreams with him where he's showing me things, or demonstrating concepts or something along that line. So I have had those kinds of dream encounters with him.
You've been doing this, what, are we at 40 years or even
40
north of
years.
it?
This year is 40 years.
40. Oh, wow. This is a big year for
Yeah,
you. 4
yeah,
decades, guys.
yeah,
And you're saying only about four, only, they're all important 4 or 5 encounters in the
yeah.
dream state, or that's interesting. So these must be very important meetups, I would imagine.
Oh yeah. I mean, one of the most important is actually depicted. We did a CG version of it in the film First Contact, the documentary. And it was, the whole thing of, why don't you just land and show yourself? And in the dream state, in the dream communication, I actually saw him land his ship, and I saw him get out and walk toward me. And as soon as he was roughly about maybe 20 feet away in the dream, I completely lost my identity, and I saw my body through his eyes, like I became him. And I felt my body back away, and that separation happened again. And he said, see, this is what would happen is our vibration, and because of our connection, our vibration is so overwhelming, so much higher than yours, that were we to expose you to that frequency before you're ready, before you've elevated your own vibration and strengthened your own identity, you would actually lose your identity in our energy field.
Mm-hmm.
And so we don't want to take that away from you. We want you to learn to raise your frequency and to something that's closer to ours, so that you can stand on your own and maintain your identity and don't get lost or give your power over to us, because
Mm-hmm.
that's not something that we want to have happen. So that was a big lesson in that dream. In another one, it was very kind of surreal, because it was like I was sitting in a chair and he was sitting in a chair, but in the dream he looked sort of human, except his skin was literally as white as paper. And so I was talking to him, and I knew there was something odd about this being. But when he would talk and I would be listening, I would actually get up out of the chair and walk over to him, get really close to him, and I would touch his skin. And I could tell when I got that close to him, his skin was not human flesh. It was this very sort of strange whitish grayish sort of material, but it was flesh, but it wasn't human flesh. But when I would back up and go back to the chair, he looked like a normal human, except for the fact that his skin was so pale it looked like paper. So I had that experience to know, okay, you're giving me a disguise, you're sort of projecting an image that I'm more comfortable with, because when I get really close and I can tell that you're not a normal human, then it felt very strange and
Mm-hmm.
unfamiliar. So he was giving me this lesson of, well, sometimes in encounters, we have the ability to telepathically sort of project an image that makes you more comfortable, that you're more
Absolutely.
familiar with, so you don't panic and have to, assimilate the idea of an alien looking life form, into your reality. So that was an interesting lesson as well.
All of that, all of what you're saying, I can see experiencers and stories that they've shared,
Mm.
uh, different but similar in that the term that's used is screen memory. Darryl, I'm sure
Right.
you've heard that.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
we've talked about that a lot in terms
Mm.
of oftentimes people will see clowns or monkeys or
Or
circus animals
owls,
or
or yeah,
owls,
right.
absolutely. And I've always asked the question, who's doing the screening? Could it be even part of our own brain,
Yes.
um, that's
Well, I'm
making it
sure
more
a part of our
palatable?
brain is used to do that, because they're drawing images from our own understanding, our own
Hmm.
memories, to disguise themselves and make the encounter more palatable.
Right, right. Going back to your family, again, you had a couple of family members in the car back in 73. Have you ever questioned an intergenerational link in terms of contact, a legacy of contact in your family, in your lineage?
Well, that's very interesting, because the friend that was with me was also, she was a very psychic person. She's since passed many years ago,
Hmm.
but she was incredibly psychic. And she had a dream once where there were these little beings around her that were sort of semi disguised, but she recognized them as ET beings. And in the dream, she was cognizant enough, in the encounter, the dream was probably some sort of a memory holdover of the encounter. But in the encounter, she was cognizant enough to ask about a friend of ours who is an abductee, classically speaking. And they said yes, yes, she in fact is part of this hybridization program. And then my friend asked, well, what about me and what about Darryl? And the answer that she got from these beings were, well, no, we're done with your family lines. They've already been altered to the point they need to be altered. So that was a very interesting and revealing answer, they're done with our family lines. So I
Hmm.
don't think it's generational for us in my family line anymore.
They're done with our family lines.
Yeah,
Mhm.
because these things do happen in family lines, but I guess at a certain point, I guess whatever tinkering is done is done.
Well, this brings me to something that Darryl and I have been trying to figure out how to present this to y'all. This is part of the movie. Again, I want to plug First Contact. All of what you're talking about is depicted so beautifully. Kudos. This is
Thank you.
just first rate, by the way. Zia Films. Shout out to Zia Films. You did a fantastic job.
Thank
But
you.
there is a critical moment. There are many of them in the film, but this one really got me going. And I tried my level best, guys, to get a clip for y'all. But you're going to go see the film in its entirety. I'm trying to figure out how to do this because it's about a 4-minute clip, but it really brings home or brought home to me, Daryl, what we may be talking about when we say the hybridization program and why these abductions over many years have been happening for many people that are asking those big questions that have been taken.
Yeah.
I'm going to start and I'll figure out intuitively where to stop and have you pick up because you'll know exactly what it is. I'm going to start with a quote. This is Bashar explaining to you what has happened. He says, "The story of my people began in a parallel reality on an alternate version of Earth. The humans on that Earth were technologically far in advance of the humans in your civilization. They became focused on technology and intellect, and over generations, they lost connections to their humanity. They lost the ability to feel. They even lost the ability to reproduce. They engineered love out of their lives. They accomplished great technological and intellectual feats at the expense of their emotions, their physical bodies, and their spiritual qualities, which they considered to be inferior." I want to go on, but I wanted. I'm just trying to figure out. He goes on to explain how not only his race was created, but the reason perhaps
Right.
why these abductions have been happening with our human race. I need you to
Right.
take it from there and encapsulate this for us.
Yeah, basically what he's explaining is that the Greys are not aliens. They're mutated humans from a parallel version of Earth that destroyed their version of Earth to the point where they had to go underground. They mutated. Their eyes got bigger to see in the dark and all this kind of stuff, but they had to mutate to survive. They tried cloning themselves to save their civilization, and that didn't work. Over generations, things started failing. They knew that they were basically in the process of dying out. So, what they knew they needed to basically perpetuate their civilization was viable human DNA, which didn't exist anymore in their reality. But they used their advanced technology to tunnel into parallel realities, to shift into parallel worlds like ours, parallel versions of Earth that exist simultaneously with theirs, where viable human DNA was still existing. And to use that DNA through the abduction experiences to create hybrid beings from their DNA and our DNA so that their civilization would continue, would survive. So the hybrid civilizations, like Bashar's people, are actually the result of those abduction experiences and the perpetuation of their culture. But sort of as a payback for the use of that DNA, the hybrids, now like Bashar, are sharing information with us in our reality so that we might not necessarily have to go down the same destructive path that the Greys went down as humans on their version of Earth, because they recognize that we're doing many of the same things that led to the destruction of that parallel
Indeed.
version of Earth. And
Mhm.
so they're trying to help us avert that and not go down the same path. And because we are family, they are genetically connected to us, the hybrids, and therefore they're attempting to help their family walk a better path, a more positive path.
The reason, thank you for that, Daryl. The reason why this hit me so hard is because at the very end it says, with the vision that your world will choose a more positive outcome than the grays, for we perceive that you have been traveling down a similar path. And I said, oh boy,
Yeah,
we are.
yeah.
We are.
See, this answers one of the mysteries that a lot of abductees have reported in their abduction experiences. It's very rare that they get the Greys to sort of say anything or admit anything. to them, but one of the things that's always been absolutely consistent anytime that the Greys do offer up some kind of communication is the phrase, "You are us." Every abductee that has had that communication has said that the Greys have said, "You are us." And this explains what they mean by that. We are them. They are us. They were human at one point. They were from a parallel Earth. And so in very real ways, they are us and we are them. And some people may equate this to the idea that they're also from our future, our own future. But since Bashar has explained that time is broken up into kind of different multiple parallel realities, being from the future is still being from a parallel version of reality. And so in very many ways, they really are us, and they could represent from one perspective our future if we don't change our path. So in a sense, if you want to look at it just as a linear thing, they're coming back from the future to say, hey, take a different path, and this won't happen. And even if they are from a distinctly different parallel reality, they're still saying basically, hey, this is what happened to us and it's happening to you. Don't go down this path.
Is it too late?
I think no, not in general. But again, the other thing to remember is, as Bashar says, you never really change the version of Earth you're on. You change yourself and you actually shift to another version of Earth, another parallel version that is now more representative of the change you've made within yourself. So other people may still experience the more destructive version of Earth. You won't necessarily experience that. And the people that want to shift or navigate themselves to more positive versions of Earth will ultimately experience that. But that doesn't mean that the version you used to be on has gone away. Many people may still experience the more destructive version if they're making those kinds of negative choices. Mm-hmm. So it's not about changing the world you're on, it's about changing yourself and being a living example of what that can create for your reality, because your reality is already the product of shifting to parallel versions of Earth many billions of times per second. We think, as Bashar explains, that we have a single linear timeline, and he's saying you don't. What you experience as a single linear timeline is actually the product of shifting through billions of parallel versions of Earth every single second.
Every single second.
This is a very kind of heady, multidimensional explanation that sometimes can be a little bit challenging to wrap your mind around. But he's explaining this as if it really is the way physics works. And so there's a lot of opportunity for us to be able to experience the versions of Earth that we would prefer to, and at the same time allow those people who are making more negative choices to also continue to experience the versions of Earth that they're basically creating for themselves as well.
Mm-hmm. A lot of people are talking more about strange time anomalies. We can talk about the repeating number phenomenon, because I'm convinced that's at least tangentially connected, but really, really strange reality shifts. I'm going to borrow a colleague's phrase, a reality shift. So it could be that we are starting to glimpse these continuously shifting timelines and picking them up.
Yeah, as we expand our consciousness, our senses become more sensitive to what's going on, since we're creating, in a sense, time and space anyway. It's a product and a projection of our consciousness. So while I'm not saying every single incident like this is the product of that, sometimes we can just, make mistakes and have psychological issues that can present certain experiences to us. On the other hand, I do think some perceptions of alternate parallel realities that people refer to as the Mandela effect, alternate histories that people remember differently, I think are actually representative of us becoming aware of parallel realities, where the history in one reality used to be one way and the history in another reality is another way. And we remember both of them, or we can experience different people having different memories of different histories. Because as Bashar says, when you change yourself sufficiently in the present, you actually change your past as well. Because the linear explanation for that is, well, if you really have become a completely different person in the present, then linearly speaking, in order to justify that difference, if it's radical enough, you have to have had a completely different past that gave you the reason why you're such a different person in the present. And therefore, you're actually changing your past as you change yourself in the present to make sense out of it from a linear space-time perspective. And so sometimes, because our senses are expanding, different people may in fact hold on to what the past used to be for who they used to be, but also simultaneously become aware of what the new past is for who the new person they are now is, and make sense to who they are now. And so some of that, again, not in every case, but some of that may be representative of the expansion of our consciousness and the realization that multiple parallel realities and multiple histories coexist simultaneously with one another. And that now we can experience that bleed through. And we sometimes experience that as different phenomenology anyway, such as things like deja vu, where we may be tapping into parallel realities where that incident may have already happened in that reality.
Sure.
But it hasn't happened in this one yet. But our brain is tapping into, our energy is tapping into something that's already happened in one reality. And so when we catch up to it, we feel, oh, wait, this feels familiar, like it's already happened. And we know what's going to happen because it's already happened. So, you know, we may get those bleed throughs from parallel realities to experience those phenomena as well.
I think that's definitely happening. I had a phase years ago where deja vu was just commonplace, and then it kind of waned. You saw me react, guys, when he said Mandela effect, because that was on my little notes, wanting to get Bashar's input on what that's all about. But you just explained it beautifully. So thank you for that.
Oh, sure.
Absolutely. Listen, before we close down, and of course, we are going to go to the Patreon after show to continue our conversation, but I want to bring up yet another event Mr. Anka will be attending. You just keep going and going like the ever ready bunny. You just got back from Sedona, and you will soon be in Boulder, Colorado for Gaia's live channeling event. Darryl, this is going to be awesome with yourself, along with Paul Selig and Sheila Gillette, Riz Mirza, Wendy Kennedy. It's a live event. I will tell y'all, I just found out it's sold out. It's sold out, but you know what? You can actually attend via their events plus live stream. So I just got a special link from our friends over at Gaia that I'll make sure to leave below. You definitely want to peek in on this one. Tell us what you're going to be doing there, Darryl, specifically.
I will be channeling Bashar there, and Bashar is basically going to be talking about, well, the title of his talk is All Roads Lead Home. And basically, he's going to be talking about the spirit world and our connection to it and our experience of it.
That's going to be really fabulous, the spirit world. Something else one day when we have you back, God willing, I'd like to go into is his thoughts on the afterlife. We're losing so many people. We've always lost lots of people, but it seems like they're leaving in waves these days and in tragic ways. And I would love to get into that conversation with you about his philosophy on what that's all about. So we'll leave that as
that extensively. Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, maybe we can touch on it just a tad over on the after show. How about that? And use it as a cliffhanger. So
up to you.
Darryl, thank you. Anything else you would like to add in closing before we go next door?
Just that it's, according to Bashar, it's so important for people to really be themselves. And in following your passion, that's really what you get to do. You get to be yourself. You get to be in alignment with your true core vibration. And it makes all the difference in your world. So getting familiar with his formula, his instruction manual for how to do this in a pragmatic and practical way really has helped me and hundreds of other people in their lives live a life that is a lot more joyful, a lot more effortless, and a lot more true to who they really are. So I would always suggest and highly recommend that people do get themselves familiar with why it's important to follow your passion and be your true self in life.
Thank you for that. You're a walking testament for that. You've been in that passion for a long time. God bless you. And thank you for all you're doing for all of us.
Thank you. Thank you for having this opportunity to share these ideas with people. So I appreciate it.
Always a pleasure, my buddy. Can't wait to see you soon, too. It'll be fun. Yeah. All right. Until next time, Journeyers. Darryl, don't hang up. We're going next door. But let me sign off for now. Please join us over there if you feel so inclined. If not, we will see you next time on Higher Journeys. Take care. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to watch what's next, plus more to explore. And don't forget to subscribe to Higher Journeys.